You know, oddly enough, this is actually a story that we sort of covered back when it happened all those years ago. And no, I'm not talking about when the Vancouver Canucks hired Jim Rutherford. We talked about that, of course, but that was from a different part of the story. What I'm talking about is current Canucks president of hockey operations Jim Rutherford and why he abruptly left the Pittsburgh Penguins organization after being the GM of that team for... How many years was he the GM of the Penguins? Was that since 2014-15 up until the end of 2020-2021? Yeah, something like that. He had been a part of the Carolina Hurricanes for like decades beforehand, and then the Hartford Whalers back in the 90s, but his tenure with the Pittsburgh Penguins was defined by 2 Stanley Cups and a lot of Penguins fans going out there and saying, hey, even though he didn't really do the best towards the end, he still won us 2 Stanley Cups, so what the heck is there for us to be complaining about? Either way, though, at the start of 2020-2021, Rutherford left the Penguins organization in a move that a lot of people were somewhat surprised to see. Now, we made a video back in this time frame saying, hey, maybe there was something going on with the Chris Letang trade, and maybe because that entire process was vetoed, we saw Rutherford resign, but at the end of the day, we had ourselves no real answers as to why the cookies crumbled the way they did. Until now. Jason Mackey of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette went out there and posted this article earlier yesterday talking about the former Penguins GM Jim Rutherford and how he's finally disclosing why he abruptly left. This article will be linked in the description if you want to go ahead and read the entire piece, but pretty much what we're going to be doing is going over the questions and answers Rutherford ends up putting on this piece. There are some quotes from the man himself as to why he left the Penguins organization, and with all things considered, I do feel like a lot of Penguins fans might feel a little bit more at peace with these comments over here because it kind of solidifies just why everything was, and it does it in a pretty clear way. The article opens up with this. It's a question that has been on the minds of Penguins fans since Jim Rutherford's abrupt resignation 7 games into the 2020-2021 season. It's also a question the team's former GM has been considering himself more and more lately. Why? I guess if I give a short answer to it, everybody is going to keep asking more questions, and that's not something I want. Rutherford was telling me, Jason Mackey, the writer of this article, by phone on Thursday from Vancouver. But I do think at some point I should say something about it. The first thing to understand, Rutherford said, was the virus. Given his age, he turned 73 in February, Rutherford was worried about the ramifications of the virus, so he, his wife Leslie, and son James hardly left the house once the pandemic started. That took a toll. Confined to his home office, Rutherford did not let his work suffer, but he said his mental toughness became a problem. Pressures to inherit the job, things he'd either internalize or shake off, gnawed at him. Rutherford said he didn't feel like himself at all. I don't want to suggest I had mental health issues. The way I would describe it is, I wasn't mentally strong as I should have been to be myself and continue to do that job. I was starting to react to things differently than I normally would, which led to where I got to. Now, before reading on, I just wanted to go out there and say this. When it comes to the pandemic, I'm pretty sure a lot of people, myself included, kind of feel like it's not really there in the same way that it was 2 years ago. But you have to remember, back in 2020, a lot of us didn't really do much. Like, I left my house once in the span of like 3 or 4 months, and when I did leave the first time, it was like a dinner to Boston Pizza with my family, and I was super anxious because we were outside in the public and there were people around. But it was the middle of 2020 and everything was, unknown. We didn't know what was going on. So the fact is, there was so much of a mental toll that I feel that entire time period forced upon people. And for Jim Rutherford, I mean, yeah, the guy's old. We know that. He's 73. And the entire time, heading into the shutdowns and everything, we all heard, oh, the virus affects older people worse than it does younger people. And so, from Rutherford's perspective back then, I could totally understand why it would worry him to that magnitude. However, I do also question how he says it's not necessarily mental health issues, because the rest of the things that are described here kind of seem like mental health issues, just the mental toughness, and how he wasn't able to internalize these things properly, and how he wasn't as strong as he should have been to continue to do the job. Like, I don't know about you, maybe this is just my Gen Z knowledge coming out there and perspective, but I do feel like there probably was some decompressing that was needed in that sort of time frame. And I get it, Jim Rutherford, as we said, he's 73 years old. He's coming from a time where talking about things like mental struggles and whatever, it was so taboo back then. So I understand if there's still kind of some reluctance to highlight those things today. But at the end of the day, at least he's being honest about it. Continuing on with the piece over here, There have been all sorts of theories tossed out there about Rutherford's strange disappearance. A big trade involving Malkin or Letang that he wasn't allowed to make, the firing of his longtime assistant, Jason Karmanos, even Rutherford wanting to shift into a role like the one Burke eventually got. See, exactly what I said. It's going to lead to more questions, Rutherford responded when I asked whether he and former Penguins president CEO David Morehouse ever butted heads. Now it's already led to another question, but it did not have anything to do with Morehouse at the beginning of the conversation. Rutherford also plans on not discussing this entire thing again. He reacted to the pandemic, and as far as he's concerned, this is the one and only time he will address it. They can ask all they want, he said. I think most people will understand what I'm saying. And yeah, that's pretty fair. Like, I like to think that the people that watch my videos are pretty understanding of this type of stuff, especially from the POV of a 73-year-old man. So just seeing everything come out here the way it has, I think it might provide some closure for Penguins fans tuning into this video wondering, hey, why the heck did that guy leave our organization almost 2 years ago? And for Vancouver fans, I mean, it opens a new door as to where the future lies here, because Rutherford went from building a Stanley Cup championship team, a back-to-back Stanley Cup championship team, by the way, to Vancouver. They then talked about Vancouver and just how it is being over here and the Chinese food. He says the restaurants here are phenomenal. Any kind of food. We found an Italian place in our neighborhood last night. Man, it was really good. There also is his go-to dish of sweet and sour chicken at China Walk, a Vancouver restaurant. It's made a little different here than it is in different places. It's interesting kind of going over the stuff about the Vancouver side of things. And then they talk a little bit more about Pittsburgh and where they're going with the team. Mario Lemieux, Morehouse, all that stuff. So you can go ahead and click the link in the description if you want to go ahead and read everything that is said in this article. It's a very long one, I will say. But at the end of the day, Jason Mackey gets out more than what you would have needed when it comes to answering the question as to why Jim Rutherford ultimately left the Penguins. Long story short, the pandemic was coming around. He's an older guy, so there's a lot of uncertainty as to how him and his body would respond to this sort of thing. And there was sort of a burnout being in the position that he was in, with all those other ideas looming over his head about a Letang trade or a Malkin trade and other people taking over the organization, etc., etc. And as a result, his mental suffered. So he ended up leaving. And you know, there's somewhat of a part of me that is very admiring of him for that. Like, if you're able to say, okay, look, I'm reacting to this entire job very poorly. I'm going out there and making decisions that I don't feel like I should normally be making, and my attitude towards this entire thing is just so stressed out because of the circumstances of my job and the world and what my home life is like, because there is no work life, home life. It's only home life. You're working from home. I gotta take a break. I gotta step back. And for somebody who has already established so much as he has in the NHL, with the Carolina Hurricanes, with the Whalers, with the, of course, the Pittsburgh Penguins too, it might be difficult to go out there and say, okay, yeah, no, just one more day, one more week, one more year, whatever. Being able to take a step back and say, yeah, no, I need to do this for myself. I admire that. I get it. There might be some Penguins fans that are like, wait a minute, he just kind of ditched the organization. But at the same time, you know, Jim Rutherford's a guy, right? So I don't know, maybe I'm just kind of happy because now he's in Vancouver, and I actually do like the way that he runs his hockey team, so seeing any sort of a fundamental change within the Canucks and their locker room and their organization and their personnel, which we have already seen, that's something I want to see expanded upon even more as the years go on. But talk in the comments either way all your thoughts about Pittsburgh Penguins, former GM Jim Rutherford leaving the organization out of nowhere, him coming over to Vancouver, and why everything fell the way it did. Talk in the comments all your thoughts. I hope you enjoyed this video. Rolls 99. And bye.